This is about your body. Your soulmate knows, but someone is telling everyone you look like a my beloved child. Something deeply personal has been said about your appearance, and your soulmate already knows exactly where it started. But here is what makes this strange: the person spreading it isn't simply describing how you look. They are trying to create an image of you in other people's minds before those people ever get the chance to know you. Your soulmate first heard the comment in what seemed like an ordinary conversation. Someone laughed, leaned closer, and said that you look like a. Then they stopped for a second, almost as if they wanted everyone nearby to fill in the blank themselves. Your soulmate didn't laugh. They went quiet. Because they had heard something almost identical before, from a completely different person. That was the moment they realized this might not be random. Don't skip, because what happened next changed the meaning of that unfinished sentence completely. At first, your soulmate thought the smartest thing was to ignore it. After all, people make careless comments about appearances every day, and someone else's opinion does not define your body, your worth, or who you are. But then another detail surfaced. The same person had apparently been asking questions about you. How you carry yourself, whether you had changed recently, and why your soulmate seemed so drawn to you. That last question stood out. Why would someone who supposedly didn't care about you be paying this much attention? Your soulmate began connecting the pieces and realized the conversation might never have truly been about your appearance. Something underneath it was driving these comments. Jealousy? Curiosity? A misunderstanding? They still couldn't tell. But then your soulmate remembered one specific moment involving you and this person, and suddenly the entire situation looked different. Stay till the end, because the missing word after, "you look like a," may not be the biggest revelation here. What your soulmate remembered was subtle. Weeks earlier, this person had seen the way your soulmate reacted when you entered a room. Nothing dramatic happened. You didn't need to perform or prove anything. Yet your soulmate's attention shifted naturally toward you, and apparently someone noticed. From that day forward, the questions began. Then came the comparisons. Then the strange comments about your appearance. Your soulmate now suspected those words were meant to influence how others saw you because someone couldn't control how strongly your presence was being noticed. But instead of confronting them immediately, your soulmate did something unexpected. They asked one simple question. Why are you so focused on how they look? The room became unusually quiet. The person who had been talking suddenly had no quick answer. And then someone else spoke up from across the room with a detail your soulmate had never heard before. Something huge is waiting for you, because that detail revealed who had actually started talking about your appearance, and why your soulmate's name had been connected to it from the very beginning. What came next was something your soulmate never expected to hear. The person across the room calmly explained that the comments about your appearance had started much earlier than everyone realized, and they had begun immediately after someone noticed how differently your soulmate spoke about you. Not your body. Not your clothes. Not some imaginary standard of beauty. It was the way your soulmate described your presence. They had once said that there was something unforgettable about you, something they couldn't easily explain. That single statement had apparently bothered someone more than it should have. Soon, innocent curiosity turned into comparisons, and comparisons turned into whispers. Your soulmate finally understood why people kept repeating that unfinished phrase, "You look like a..." Someone wanted to attach a label to you before others could form their own opinion. But there was still one question nobody had answered: why did this person care so much about changing the way your soulmate saw you? Then the conversation took an even stranger turn. Your soulmate asked whether you had ever actually said or done anything to the person spreading these comments. The answer was immediate: no. You hadn't created an argument. You hadn't tried to compete with anyone. You might not have even realized these conversations were happening. That realization made your soulmate look at everything differently. If there was no real conflict, then the problem wasn't something you had done. It was something your presence represented to somebody else. Stay a little longer, because this is where your soulmate stopped listening to the gossip and started watching the behavior behind it. Every time your name came up, one particular person became unusually interested. Every time someone said something positive about you, that same person quickly changed the subject or added a negative comparison. And when your soulmate finally noticed the pattern, they decided to test it with one carefully chosen sentence. Your soulmate casually said, "Actually, I like the way they look exactly as they are." Nothing more. No argument. No dramatic confrontation. Just one calm sentence. And suddenly the person who had been making those comments reacted differently. Their expression changed. They tried to laugh it away, but then they asked a revealing question: "So you really don't see what everyone else sees?" Your soulmate immediately caught those words, "everyone else." Who exactly was everyone? Don't skip, because your soulmate asked that question directly, and the answer exposed something nobody in that room expected. There wasn't an entire group judging you at all. Several people had simply been repeating what they believed other people were saying. The rumor had been made to sound bigger than it actually was. And just when your soulmate thought they had discovered the source, someone quietly revealed that the person spreading it wasn't the original source either. They had heard that unfinished description from one specific person, and when your soulmate heard the name, everything suddenly became much more personal. The name changed everything, because your soulmate recognized it immediately. This wasn't some distant stranger who had seen you once and formed a careless opinion. It was someone who had been close enough to observe you, close enough to notice your soulmate's interest, and close enough to understand exactly which words might create doubt. But instead of becoming angry, your soulmate became curious. Why would this person take one detail about your appearance and keep turning it into a conversation? Then another clue surfaced. Someone admitted that the original sentence had been repeated incorrectly. The words everyone had been passing around were not exactly what had first been said. One person shortened it. Another exaggerated it. And suddenly an ordinary observation had become something completely different. Stay till the end, because your soulmate was about to hear the original sentence for the first time. When the real wording finally came out, your soulmate noticed something almost nobody else had considered. The original remark wasn't simply about whether you looked attractive or unattractive. It was a comparison designed to make you seem like a certain type of person based only on your appearance. Your soulmate immediately rejected that idea. They knew your personality could never be reduced to somebody else's label, and your body certainly wasn't evidence of your character. But there was another surprise. The person who originally made the comparison had apparently been watching how confidently you carried yourself. They noticed that you didn't seem desperate for approval, and that bothered them. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate suddenly understood that the conversation about your body had been covering a completely different emotion. Someone felt threatened by the attention you received without even asking for it. But your soulmate still wanted proof before deciding what this truly meant. So they asked one final question: what happened right before the first comment was made? For several seconds, nobody answered. Then someone remembered. Just before those words were spoken, your soulmate had been asked what they genuinely noticed about you. Their answer had been simple: your presence felt different because you seemed comfortable being yourself. That was it. And almost immediately afterward, the comparison about your appearance began. Suddenly the timeline made sense. The whispers hadn't started because something was wrong with your body. They started after someone realized your soulmate appreciated something about you that couldn't be controlled by comparison. But there was still one piece missing. Your soulmate turned toward the person who knew the original source and asked, "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" The response was quiet, unexpected, and powerful, because there's something else they said about you that nobody has repeated yet. That final sentence made your soulmate stop completely. If everyone had been repeating the comment about your appearance, why had nobody repeated what came afterward? The person hesitated, then explained that the original speaker had actually contradicted themselves moments later. After trying to place you into a shallow category based on how you looked, they admitted something surprising: you were difficult to dismiss because the more people actually spoke with you, the less that label made sense. Your confidence, expressions, personality, and natural way of carrying yourself changed the entire impression. Suddenly, your soulmate understood why only half the conversation had traveled from person to person. The first half created gossip. The second half destroyed it. And someone had deliberately left that second half out. But don't skip, because your soulmate was about to discover exactly who had been editing the story, and what they were trying to accomplish. Your soulmate started tracing the conversation backward. One person had heard it from another, who had heard it from someone else, until the chain finally reached the person responsible for turning one awkward remark into a much bigger story. And their reason wasn't what your soulmate expected. They weren't trying to convince everyone that there was something wrong with your body. They were trying to make your soulmate question their own feelings about you. They believed that if enough people repeated the same comparison, eventually your soulmate would begin seeing you through everyone else's eyes instead of their own. But it had the opposite effect. Every new comment made your soulmate remember something genuine about you. Your expressions when you weren't trying to impress anyone, the way your presence felt familiar, and the small details that made you unmistakably yourself. The more others tried to define you, the more certain your soulmate became that those definitions were incomplete. Then your soulmate did something nobody in that room expected. They stopped asking what people thought about your appearance and asked what they actually knew about you. Silence. Some knew almost nothing. Others had only heard stories. And the loudest person in the conversation had barely spoken to you at all. That realization shifted everything. Your soulmate finally saw how easily one person's insecurity could become another person's assumption, and how quickly assumptions could masquerade as truth. Yet one mystery remained. Why had the original speaker noticed you so closely in the first place? Someone finally answered that question with a detail your soulmate hadn't known. Before any of these whispers began, that person had privately asked whether you and your soulmate were becoming closer. And when they received the answer, their entire attitude toward you changed. What your soulmate said in that private conversation was about to reveal the real reason your appearance became everyone's favorite subject. The private conversation finally explained what had been hiding underneath everything. When that person asked whether you and your soulmate were becoming closer, your soulmate didn't give them the answer they expected. They simply said, "There's something about this person I want to understand better." It wasn't a dramatic confession, but apparently it was enough. From that moment, the other person realized your soulmate's interest wasn't based on some passing impression. They were curious about your mind, your personality, your energy, and the person behind the appearance everyone kept discussing. That was when the comments became more frequent. Every comparison seemed designed to pull your soulmate's attention back toward the surface. But it wasn't working. In fact, your soulmate had begun noticing something completely different, and once they admitted it aloud, the entire conversation shifted again. Your soulmate revealed that the feature they remembered most about you wasn't something that could be ranked, compared, or measured. It was how your expression changed when you became genuinely interested in something. The way you seemed more alive when you forgot anyone was watching. The quiet confidence that appeared when you stopped trying to explain yourself. Those details had stayed in their memory far longer than any rumor. Don't skip, because this was the moment the person spreading the story realized they had misunderstood your soulmate completely. They had assumed attraction could be weakened by enough outside opinions. Instead, every attempt to criticize your appearance had pushed your soulmate to think more carefully about why you stood out to them in the first place. And then your soulmate asked the question nobody wanted to answer: why does my opinion of this person matter so much to you? For the first time, there was no clever response. No laughter. No comparison. Just an uncomfortable pause that told your soulmate they had finally reached the real issue. Someone in that room quietly admitted that the person had been comparing themselves with you for longer than anyone knew. Not because you had challenged them, and not because your body needed to look any particular way, but because they had noticed how naturally your soulmate's attention returned to you. Your soulmate immediately made one thing clear: another person's insecurity was not permission to turn your appearance into public conversation. But just when it seemed the mystery had finally been solved, a new detail emerged. The person who had been comparing themselves with you wasn't the one who originally noticed your soulmate's feelings. Someone else had pointed it out to them first. And according to the person across the room, that individual knew something about your soulmate's intentions that even your soulmate hadn't openly admitted yet. That revelation shifted the entire room again. The person who had first noticed your soulmate's feelings wasn't guessing from one glance or one conversation. They had been paying attention to a pattern. Whenever your name appeared, your soulmate listened differently. Whenever someone reduced you to your appearance, they became noticeably quieter instead of joining in. And whenever another person tried comparing you with someone else, your soulmate refused to participate. Eventually, this observer pulled the insecure person aside and said something surprisingly simple: "You're competing with someone who isn't competing with you." Those words apparently changed everything. The comparisons intensified afterward, because suddenly the issue wasn't really about how you looked. It was about the possibility that your soulmate valued something in you that another person couldn't copy by changing clothes, appearance, or behavior. Stay a little longer, because your soulmate was about to discover what that observer believed your soulmate truly wanted from you. When your soulmate finally asked, the answer came without hesitation. The observer said your soulmate wasn't looking at you like someone evaluating a perfect image. They were looking at you like someone trying to decide whether they could trust what they were feeling. That distinction mattered. Your soulmate had noticed your imperfections just as anyone notices ordinary human details, but those things weren't pushing them away. Instead, they were becoming curious about the real person underneath every assumption. That was why the gossip had failed. Someone could say you look like this or look like that, but your soulmate had already experienced enough of your personality to know appearance couldn't tell the whole story. Don't skip. Because then the observer mentioned one moment your soulmate thought nobody else had noticed, a moment when you walked away, and your soulmate continued watching the space where you had been standing. Your soulmate looked stunned. That tiny moment had meant more than anyone realized. They admitted they hadn't been studying your body or comparing you with anybody. They had been wondering whether they should finally speak honestly with you instead of continuing to keep their feelings hidden. Suddenly, the entire chain of gossip made sense. Someone had witnessed that hesitation, recognized what it might mean, and told another person. That person became insecure, the comparisons began, and eventually the unfinished phrase about how you look like a traveled through the group. But now your soulmate knew the truth behind it, and they weren't interested in defending you by creating another argument. They wanted to do something more meaningful, speak to you directly. Something huge is waiting for you, because before your soulmate could decide what to say, the observer revealed one final detail. The person who started the comparisons had already approached you once, and you may not have realized who they were or why they were asking those strangely specific questions. That detail pulled your soulmate back to a moment you may have considered completely ordinary. The person had approached you casually, almost too casually, and asked questions that seemed harmless at the time, whether you cared what people thought of your appearance, whether you ever compared yourself with others, and whether someone's opinion could change the way you saw yourself. You answered without realizing there was another conversation happening behind those questions. According to the observer, your response surprised them. You didn't try to prove that you were better looking than anyone. You didn't turn the conversation into a competition. You simply made it clear that you wanted to be comfortable being yourself. And when that answer traveled back to the group, the person who had been comparing themselves with you became even more confused. They had expected insecurity. Instead, they found something they couldn't easily use against you. Your soulmate listened carefully as another forgotten detail surfaced. After speaking with you, that person reportedly admitted, "They're not who I thought they were." That sentence mattered because it exposed the weakness in the entire rumor. People had been discussing what you look like, while knowing almost nothing about who you actually were. Your soulmate suddenly realized that the unfinished comparison had survived only because nobody had stopped long enough to question it. Stay till the end, because this was where your soulmate made a decision that surprised everyone. They refused to ask what exact label people had attached to your body anymore. They said it didn't matter. Whatever word completed that sentence belonged to someone else's perception, not your identity. Instead, your soulmate wanted to know why someone. The secret conversation had happened weeks before your soulmate ever heard the first comparison. According to the quiet observer, someone had asked a surprisingly specific question about you. What is it about them that keeps getting noticed? At first, the answer sounded simple. People mentioned your expressions, the way you carried yourself, and the fact that you seemed memorable without deliberately demanding attention. But then one person said something that changed the tone completely. They claimed your soulmate wasn't interested because you matched some perfect physical image. They believed your soulmate was drawn to the fact that you seemed real, unpolished in the most human way, comfortable enough to have ordinary imperfections without hiding them. That observation traveled through the group, but somewhere along the way its meaning was twisted. What began as appreciation became comparison. What began as curiosity became gossip. And suddenly people were talking about what you look like, instead of asking why your presence had affected your soulmate so deeply. Your soulmate finally understood why the exact word completing that unfinished sentence had become almost irrelevant. The rumor depended on making you believe there was some category you needed to escape, as though your body had to earn somebody's approval. But your soulmate's private words revealed the opposite. They had apparently told someone, "I don't want them changing because people are talking." Don't skip, because that sentence exposed a side of your soulmate nobody in the room had expected. They weren't secretly measuring you against another person. They were worried that if these comments ever reached you, you might begin looking at yourself through the harsh opinions of people who barely knew you. And that bothered them far more than the gossip itself. Your soulmate didn't want to decide how you should look. They wanted you to know that their interest had never depended on you fitting somebody else's standard. Then came the detail that finally silenced everyone. The quiet observer admitted that the original speaker had eventually tried to correct the rumor. They had said their first comparison was careless and didn't represent what they actually discovered after speaking with you. But by then, the shorter, more dramatic version had already traveled farther than the truth. Your soulmate stood there realizing how easily one unfinished sentence had become an entire story about your body. Yet instead of chasing every person who repeated it, they made a different decision. They wanted the next conversation about you to happen with you present, where nobody could speak for you or define you from a distance. Something huge is waiting for you, because as your soulmate prepared to reach out, the observer handed them one final piece of information. Someone had already told you a version of this story, but they deliberately changed one crucial detail about what your soulmate had supposedly said about your appearance. The changed detail was small enough to sound believable, but powerful enough to alter the entire meaning. Someone had apparently told you that your soulmate had joined the comparison. That they had agreed with the strange label being attached to your appearance. But according to everyone who had actually been present, that never happened. Your soulmate had done the opposite. They had questioned the comparison from the beginning and refused to let someone else decide what your body supposedly said about your personality. Now they understood why you might have seemed slightly more distant afterward. Maybe you had heard a version of the story that made you believe their silence meant agreement. It didn't. Their silence had been observation. They were trying to discover who kept repeating the comment and why. And suddenly your soulmate realized this wasn't simply gossip anymore. Someone had been changing both sides of the story, telling your soulmate one thing about you while possibly telling you something completely different about them. That realization forced your soulmate to examine every conversation again. Who benefited if the two of you misunderstood each other? The answer pointed toward the same person who had repeatedly carried information between people. They rarely created a story from nothing. Instead, they changed one word here, removed one sentence there, and allowed assumptions to do the rest. Stay till the end, because your soulmate finally confronted them with something they couldn't easily explain. "Tell me exactly what you told them," I said. The person hesitated. First they claimed they couldn't remember. Then they said everyone had misunderstood. But another person in the room remembered perfectly. They had overheard the conversation. And according to them, your soulmate's original words, "I like the way they look exactly as they are," had somehow been retold to you as something almost completely opposite. For your soulmate, that was the turning point. They stopped caring about winning an argument and started caring about correcting what might have reached you. Because if you had ever looked in the mirror and wondered whether your soulmate secretly judged something about your appearance, they wanted that misunderstanding gone. Your body was never supposed to become a debate, and another person's comparison was never supposed to become your burden. But just as your soulmate prepared to contact you directly, the person who had overheard everything added one last revelation. They said the altered message wasn't delivered to you randomly. It had been timed for a particular moment, right after someone discovered that your soulmate was considering telling you how they genuinely felt. Don't skip, because when your soulmate asked how anyone knew about that private decision, the answer pointed towards someone they had trusted with a conversation that was never supposed to leave the room. The person your soulmate had trusted wasn't supposed to become part of this story at all. They had been told one private thing: your soulmate was thinking about speaking to you honestly, but wanted to choose the right moment. Nothing dramatic. Nothing about changing you. Nothing about judging your appearance. Yet somehow, that private thought traveled outward, and almost immediately the comments about your body became louder. Your soulmate finally saw the timing clearly. The comparisons weren't increasing because people had suddenly noticed something new about you. They increased because someone realized your soulmate might soon stop wondering and actually move closer to you. That possibility created pressure. And under that pressure, someone tried to make appearances feel more important than connection. But there was one detail your soulmate still couldn't understand. Why would the trusted person reveal something so private when they had always seemed supportive of you? The answer arrived quietly. The trusted person hadn't intended to start anything. They had mentioned your soulmate's feelings during another conversation, believing the information would stay private. But the person listening immediately asked, "Are you sure they know what this person really looks like?" That question was strange enough to be remembered. Your soulmate had obviously seen you. So what were they actually implying? Don't skip, because the next sentence exposed the strategy completely. They began pointing out tiny physical details, exaggerating ordinary features as though your soulmate had somehow failed to notice them. But your soulmate's response had been simple. "Of course I notice. I just don't see them the way you do." That sentence was apparently what frustrated the other person most. They couldn't understand why pointing out supposed imperfections wasn't changing anything. They were trying to create doubt, while your soulmate was becoming more certain that attraction wasn't something another person could negotiate on their behalf. Then your soulmate learned what happened immediately after that conversation. The person had reportedly said, "Then maybe they need to hear what everyone thinks." And suddenly the entire chain made sense: the unfinished comparison, the repeated whispers, the altered message that may have reached you, even the strange question someone had asked you directly. None of it proved anything about your body. It revealed how desperately someone wanted outside opinions to become more powerful than your soulmate's own experience of you. But now your soulmate had something they didn't have before: the complete timeline. They knew where the story changed, who carried it forward, and why the truth had been distorted. Still, one final question remained. Before contacting you, your soulmate asked the trusted person exactly what had been said when the rumor was first planned. Their answer contained a sentence nobody had mentioned yet, a sentence about what would happen if you ever discovered how your soulmate truly saw you. That hidden sentence was the first thing your soulmate wanted repeated word for word. The trusted person hesitated, then finally admitted what had been said: "If they find out how you really see them, none of these comparisons will matter anymore." Suddenly, your soulmate understood the entire strategy. Someone wasn't merely hoping you would feel uncertain about your appearance. They were hoping uncertainty would keep you from discovering the truth about your soulmate's feelings. Because once you knew that your soulmate wasn't secretly measuring you against anyone, the whispers would lose their power. The unfinished, "you look like a" comparison only worked while you believed its ending mattered. But your soulmate had never been waiting for you to become someone else. They had been waiting for enough courage and clarity to tell you that what drew them closer was the complete person, not one feature, one angle, or somebody else's opinion. Then your soulmate asked something even more important: "Did they actually hear the rumor from me?" The answer was no. Every version had traveled through somebody else first. That meant the story you may have heard about your soulmate's supposed opinion was built almost entirely from second-hand words. Stay till the end, because this realization changed your soulmate's next move. They decided they would no longer send messages through mutual friends or allow another person to explain what they supposedly meant. If there was going to be a conversation about you, it would happen directly with you. And before doing that, they wanted one thing absolutely clear: they weren't approaching you to reassure you that you met some physical standard. They wanted to remove the standard from the conversation altogether. Your appearance belongs to you. Their feelings belong to them. Neither should have been turned into entertainment for everyone else. But just as your soulmate thought they finally possessed the complete truth, the trusted person remembered one last exchange. After saying the comparisons would become meaningless if you discovered your soulmate's real feelings, the person behind the gossip had asked, "What if they already know?" That question landed differently. Why would they suspect you already understood something? Your soulmate immediately asked what had happened before those words were spoken. The answer pointed back to your encounter with the person who had questioned you so carefully. Apparently, after talking with them, you had said one quiet sentence that traveled straight back to the group. Nobody had told your soulmate about it until now. And according to the trusted person, the moment your soulmate hears exactly what you said, they may finally understand why the rumors suddenly became so desperate.